My name is Sikena Walji, and I'm the director of CILT, and I'm really delighted to see so many of our colleagues in CHED here and also across from UCT. And I'm especially excited to have many UCT students here joining us today. And if you are a student, a special welcome to you, and we really look forward to hearing your perspectives. I know we have still people coming in, and we had a really healthy sign up today, but I am going to just start with the introductions because I think we want to give as much time as possible to our panelists. So this is the first of our planned monthly panels discussing matters to do with artificial intelligence in education, and in particular generative AI such as ChatGPT. And other tools based on large language models. At CILT, over the past 6 months, we've been tracking developments and engaging in conversations about what this means to the teaching and learning project in our context at UCT. We've run some introductory workshops and seminars to develop a common understanding of some of the main issues, share ideas and resources, and we know that there are many rich conversations happening across UCT. And we've been sort of privileged to be part of some of those, shaping and informing them as well. I think it's fair to say that there's a fair mixture of alarm and trepidation about what the availability of generative artificial intelligence tools means for teaching, learning, and in particular for assessment. But it's not only about academic integrity and whether the AI can do assessments and what constitutes plagiarism and what constitutes cheating, but it's also issues around the nature of the large language models, the biases, potential harms that are contained within the data sets, and that which sometimes appear in the outputs as well. So there are some very big questions around and concerns and issues. Again, these are conversations that have been happening. I think there's also a fair bit of excitement and optimism about the potential benefits for the educational project in so many ways. Can we use these tools as automated graders, study buddies, 24/7 tutors, and so on? What does it mean for writing, for coding, for different types of disciplines? And perhaps there's also some longer term thinking and strategizing around what sort of education and what sort of degrees are going to be relevant in a future world where workplaces include generative AI as core work tools. So these are huge questions, and I'm very happy today I get to ask the questions. And so I'm delighted to welcome 3 colleagues from the UCT community to share their views, and I'm going to ask them to come on camera. I will introduce them very briefly, and then we've asked them to speak for about 7 minutes on their perspective of how should we respond to ChatGPT in the classroom and at UCT from their perspective and expertise, and then we will open it out for discussion. Cheng Wen is my colleague Cheng Wen, who has set up this panel, will also be monitoring the chat as well. So please do put questions in the chat. Okay, so welcome. So first of all, I'll introduce Zainab Rouhania. She's a lecturer in the Department of Information Systems in the Commerce faculty. She teaches object-oriented programming and software development and cybersecurity. And she coordinates the research group focused on cybersecurity and privacy. And she does a lot more, but I'll stop there for time. But welcome, Zainab. Then I'll introduce Anita. Anita is a researcher and maths educator in the Academic Support Program for Engineering, Academic Development Program for Engineering at UCT. And her work revolves around supporting student success and thriving. Her PhD explored growth mindsets, and she co-founded the annual UCT Positive Psychology Symposia. So I think we definitely need your perspective here, Anita. And then I'm delighted to invite Jan Bass, who's a lecturer at the Department of Computer Science. His research area is natural language processing and machine learning, with a particular focus on text generation and low resource natural language processing. And he's been working on large language models since before they became large. So I'd like to know a little bit more about that. And Jan, a few months ago, we had Associate Professor Dishan Mudli talk to us. And after that, he said you were the person to talk to at UCT about large language models. So I'm delighted that you agreed to join us, even though I think you are on sabbatical somewhere glamorous right now. Okay, so I think we can get straight to it. And in fact, I didn't ask who wanted to go first, but I'm going to do it in the order that I introduced you, if that's okay. So Zainab, over to you to maybe give your perspective on what's happening, how should we respond, and what are you doing in your classroom around generative AI and ChatGPT?
Okay. As you have introduced me, and part of the courses that I teach is object-oriented programming, the introductory part of it, and I teach that in the second year, and I teach C# as one, and also teach software development for third years, and I teach cybersecurity. So all these courses that I teach are much more technical, and areas that involves any new tool and technology. Students from this area, they tend to go much more online, figuring out solutions, problems, etc. So for me as an educator, if I put myself in that position, and my view on large language models that are out there, I say we should embrace it because it's already here, and there's no way we are going to run away from it. If in cases where we say, okay, we should restrict use of these tools in our classrooms, we are creating areas where we will invite unethical behavior, including because we don't have control of what students are doing outside of our classroom. That is one. So my position is embracing and using it. And should, should I say adopt? I'm not so sure, because adoption involves a lot more than what we have in terms of resources. But I am on adapting and working with it and using it. And in my classroom setting, so as I said, I teach object-oriented programming in C#. So most of the things that I teach, they are much introductory. So for this year, I did not completely use that as a way, like instructing students to use large language models, such as the tools that can allow them to ask questions, and especially related to programming, such as, let's say, Codex, Copilot, etc. I didn't explicitly tell my students to use it, but I used it in some of my courses, such as in cybersecurity, when I would give examples of in secure software development. I give examples on how they could analyze code, or to look at development of what is this called? To look at development of attack code, such as the code that does crypto. Yeah, so when I'm teaching secure software development, I would give examples on how to use it. But in introductory to programming, I have not started to use it, and I was trying to see a way of how I can do it better, and how can we teach programming better by using these LLMs in the classroom, making sure that students understand the problems that we give them, but also not only to give them solution of what question that you have given, but to create a way for them to think and decompose problems. And if it's asking, if it is in cases of asking questions to these large language models, they should understand how to decompose a problem and put it out there for that model to give them the solution that they are looking at. Because we do have the problems that we work with in programming, more especially when we are teaching the basic knowledge. They're familiar. You can get them online. You can get in some crowdsourcing places. You can get them from GitHub. And in teaching, we do encourage them to look at solution. If they have a problem, to look at solution to some forums, like look at this solution if you have a question. So with tools such as Copilot or Codex or ChatGPT that is out there that can give them a solution to a question that a student has, I think it's important to look at ways we can teach better instead of just it's important to teach theory and to make sure that students understand problem solving and understand how to effectively bring in solutions, but also to decompose the problem that they have, because what student that we want to produce, we are just not producing the student that will come here and then they will go out with it with just theoretical knowledge. When they go in the industry, they'll be working with different types of tools that they have access to. So I believe it's important to teach them well how to use them, because the business are not looking at only the theoretical knowledge. They look at how they can solve the complex problems and how they can generate profit. So if they can use these tools to help them into generating solutions or the problem that the business are trying to solve and maximizing profits into the business, I think it's something that we should embrace and include it in our learning. But how do we do that? We need to change how we teach. We need to change how we assess our students, and we need to make it not as not how can I say, not to prohibit and make students go out there and look for alternative hiding solutions, or but to make it obvious, like you can use it and you can tell us how did you use it. If you have a complex problem, you give it to them, and how can you decompose it, and how did you use the tool to generate the idea that you came up with. So that's how I would think we can do with a, let's say, undergraduate student. But another way that this is done, I do have honor students and master students. Sometimes students get stuck with generating ideas of, like, they have a question in their mind, but they do not know how to go. They can use these tools in generation of ideas that they have, or expansion of ideas. But in literature review, you can just go in ChatGPT and say, and paste something and say, give me a literature review. So once they generate the idea, they can use those ideas to go and find literature, study, understand what they want to do, because ChatGPT is not going to do data collection for a student, is not going to do the experiment for the student. So if the generation of idea is done and they're able to go do the literature review, put things together and analyze what they have, go do data collection, come out, I think it's a good tool that they can use. We do send our students to editors once they finish their program. So because of writing and grammatical error, we use Grammarly every day. This is a machine learning and an AI powered tool. The student can use ChatGPT for edit and proofreading their work. So it will save them money. And also save them time. As they're writing, they could use it. But there are some issues to consider, which are like ethical issues. So what are the ethics around that? What if it changes the sentence and give you something different? Are you going to take it as is, or are you just going to give a prompt that would say edit and proofread, do not change anything? So that's for me in question of postgraduate students that are doing research. And another thing that I also we need to consider in terms of adaptation, like if we're adapting or adopting, the area that we are, where are we as in the type of student that we have. In education, we want to create an equity environment for all students. So if we prohibit use of these tools, students that can afford paying and accessing this, they progress more than students that cannot afford paying and accessing this. So in terms of adoption, let's say we adopt use of, so as a programmer, I give my examples of like, we adopt use of Copilot. Copilot is has paid subscription and some pay, some free services. If we agree adoption of that, we need to provide those services for every student in my classroom, because I would like every student to have that service and to be able to ask questions and to get the answers as they require. Similar to how we give them tools to use in the labs, we should be able to give that. So that is in terms of if we want to adopt. But if we say, okay, we can use it, you can use it as an extended something for your knowledge, but you have to declare that in the usage so that to avoid the cheating, etc. How do we make sure that a student that cannot afford having the full version of that tool is able to access that, is able to be in the same level as another student that can afford the paid version? Because I know with the use of ChatGPT, the use of ChatGPT 3, which is free version, and for those that can pay, they can use ChatGPT 4, which is much more powerful, and it can produce text that mimic human language, and you can tell it to produce however you want it. And even the use of those AI detection tools such as ChatGPT 0 or any other tool that is there, sometimes they do not detect them effectively. So now we go back to the issue of equity. I can quickly read someone's texts if they didn't think through and see that this is and copy and paste the ChatGPT and bring it as part of their work. You can read and tell that this is coming from there. But a student that can have a ChatGPT 4 can fool you. It's easy for you to just quickly say, oh, this is a very good writing, but they can fool you, and you might not know, if you do not know what to expect, might not know if this student is actually having a work that is coming from and large language model that is generating this text. So going back, we have in embracing, we have to think about making it being open and allow open use and student declaring usage of it, and thinking of equity and how are we going to create a leveled learning environment for our students. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Zainab. Those were incredibly important points there. And although you started off with kind of the embracing, I think you took us through a very important thought process about some of the issues, which hopefully we can come back to. Okay, Anita, I'm going to ask you now to kind of give us your input to the prompt. Like a GPT prompt.
Yes, so anyone feel free to send me a prompt in the chat if you'd like a response, and I will then send it into ChatGPT and see what it should tell me to say. No, so I teach maths, and in maths, for many years, we have not allowed calculators in our tests or exams for the very reason that Zainab was just talking about, that some people have a better device, which is a more expensive one, more powerful. And I just thought, what is the point in telling someone your 800 Rand calculator that is far superior, please park it and buy a cheap, silly one for your exams that you will never use again in your life? I don't even have a calculator. I go to the computer if I want to do a calculation. So our exams, we haven't been using calculators at all. People come in with a pen and that's it. There's debate about exactly what skills are necessary for a student to be able to perform with no resources in 3 hours of handwriting. And is this an antiquated assessment regime that we are putting students through? And yet what it does is it gives you a pressure situation that is uncomfortable, that you almost certainly will survive, you know, with a positive or negative outcome, but you grow through that. And it is something, the only thing I have good to say about exams is that it does mimic a pressure situation that you will experience in the workplace or in your future life after university. And having that memory of surviving a previous uncomfortable pressure situation does help. So what I like to tell my students is, suppose you're waiting for the bus and you find yourself sitting next to an MIT student on holiday. Turns out they're studying your course and they want to chat to you about your maths course and, you know, the specific topic and like what method and how do you feel about it? If you are sitting in that conversation, suddenly pretending you can't speak English to get out of it because you're embarrassed, because you actually have nothing to say, because you weren't paying attention and you were strategizing to be able to cram and pass your exam on memory, you know, on the 3 days before the exam, you don't deserve your credits, even if you can score 90% in the exam. That's not what the game is about. So the game is really about developing yourself with confidence to be able to speak about the things that you are learning, to be able to understand the sort of the nuances within the sections that you're covering, to be able to have an opinion about what you like and what you don't, and maybe to be able to eventually reflect back and see how you have changed, because like changing yourself is really the purpose of education. So I hope people don't waste their time at university gaming the system to the extent that they just, you know, try and find smarter and smarter cheat methods. I've heard stories of students graduating, they scrape through 50s, 60s sometimes, and when they graduate, you know, they, my colleague said, they came to her and said, I'm not ready to go and work. I mean, I can't do anything. You know, suddenly the panic hits that you've actually wasted your time where you could have developed yourself and gained in confidence, and you did not. So that's where the problem comes. So let me give you an example of some things I've done. Fortunately for me, so far, ChatGPT is pretty bad at maths. So here's an example of an exam question I put in. Okay, so if you don't like maths, just imagine, you know, where there's some maths, it's something that you would like. So to evaluate this integral, ChatGPT suggested, and then I copied and pasted from something ChatGPT said, but it's wrong. So my question is, show that ChatGPT's substitution does not give this bit of maths and then give the correct integral. And then I went on and I said, and Symbolab, which has been around, you know, for many years. This is not like ChatGPT is not the first thing to be able to try and do our maths for us. So Symbolab does not say how it was found, but it correctly gives this as an answer. So there I actually didn't want to test that they knew the technique of how to get that bit of maths. I wanted to see if they, knowing that answer, can then work out the next bit of maths, which was question 2.2. So that it sort of gives you like, if you're coming into a situation in a workplace where you are going to collaborate with other people, you're not necessarily sitting alone and solving the problem from start to end. You're going to be jumping around and doing little bits. So these tools allow us to do that. What I don't know how to really deal with is if you're coming in with zero knowledge, how to assess whether what the computer is giving you is true or not. So if you are a 7-year-old trying to learn through this tool, so far ChatGPT 3 would not be your safe teacher. But then you go to Khan.me. So the Khan Academy is developing a little chatbot on the side, and that's designed to be like a personal tutor, which has, to me, great potential. Okay, so another thing that I did use ChatGPT successfully for was I got students to submit potential exam questions onto Gradescope. So they handwrite them and submit them by photographing them onto Gradescope. And then I summarized all the different kinds of topics that the questions were for. And then as I was busy doing that, I thought, surely there's an easier way. And so I gave it to ChatGPT and I said, okay, so here's a list. I sort of did a short summary of what the names were in a big list, put it in and said, all right, so categorize what this big list of potential questions fall under. And then for that section of work, we got a very nice summary of different topics. So yeah, that was just quite useful. I don't know if I want to, I don't think I'm going to turn off any more people showing you more maths terms, but that was a very useful function that I found. I feel like I'm just doing baby steps in how to use this. I am really for leveraging tools like this, totally against the idea of trying to pretend these things don't exist and thinking that we can control them. I mean, right now, ChatGPT can't do maths wonderfully. In a year's time, we're not going to have this conversation. It will be much better. It'll be much smarter than us. And honestly, I'm ready for robot friends, robot like companions in my home. I don't want to cook. I don't want to plan meals. I don't want to vacuum or anything like that. Bring on the robots, I say. Okay, and I have seen a few things, and yes, I know they can be scary, and you know. But I'm not the person dealing with that. That's why we have a diverse population. So maybe Jan is going to help us bring some protection to our society.
Thank you. Thanks, Anita. That was great. But presumably you want to eat the food. You just don't want to cook it, right? Okay, thank you. So over to you, Jan. We gave you the prompt. How can we respond to ChatGPT? And I suppose having listened to Zainab and Anita's kinds of perspectives, it'd be really interesting to hear what you have to say in terms of, will it be much smarter than us in a year's time? Where are we going with this? So thank you. Over to you.
Okay, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I mean, this is quite a broad topic, so I'll start with just sort of a few high-level thoughts on the direct question, and then I guess we can see exactly where the discussion goes. Yeah, so in terms of potential benefits of using these large language models, such as GPT in the classroom, a few of these things may have been mentioned already, but I'll just briefly go over it. So, these language models, they are a very powerful tool for assisting students to learn and to support teaching in a lot of ways. So, obviously we can use these language models for accessing knowledge, for summarizing knowledge about the topic, or for summarizing some information, as Anita mentioned. These models can also assist with writing. So if someone is writing an essay or almost any kind of writing, one can ask the language model, to write text, or ask it to correct or improve some writing, and it can also do coding quite well. And the ideal use case is almost where we can use these language models to automate the more tedious parts of assignments or of the research process, so that the person using it can focus more on the sort of high level problem solving and formulating the problem, I think, as Zainab also also mentioned. Then it can also assist lecturers in various teaching activities. One can use these language models as a way to try to, say, generate questions. If you're setting an assignment or setting an exams, it can, generate possible lesson plans and a number of other other things that can make a teacher's life more easy. And then, in general, as I think, Zainab also already mentioned, these tools are going to be used widely in the workplace and in everyday life, no matter what. So we might as well teach students how to use these tools wisely and sort of and teach them to understand how much should it believe the output or not, and in which use cases it's maybe a good idea or maybe not such a good idea to use it. Then in terms of adapting language models for teaching, I mean, that's also quite broad. So the one thing that I think has a lot of potential is if one is able to essentially adapt these language models for specific teaching applications. So, for example, it can be used to give feedback to students on their writing or on drafts of their assignments. It can be used to essentially guide students in the same way that we are currently using tutors to guide students. However, there is a risk in that we don't, in the learning process, we don't just want ChatGPT to give the final answer or to solve the assignments. So the idea would then be that, in principle, one can create kind of a custom version of a language model that is supposed to at least not give a student the answer directly, but rather assist them in ways that we think will will support the learning process rather than just going around it. The other way to use it is to essentially have assignments that require students to use these large language models, and this can be done in a way that you ask the language model to give an answer, or and then essentially the student has to critique it or analyze the response to see if there are any issues or to try to improve on that, although that's maybe going to become harder to do as time goes on. And importantly, we can also use this as a way to teach students about the potential issues with using large language models. So the fact that they're not always reliable, we can't take the output that they give us always accept it just as the truth. We've already, a number of these other issues have already been mentioned. These systems have a lot of bias in them in terms of their kind of worldview based on the data that they have been trained on. They can, be manipulated to give all kinds of undesirable outputs. There might also be some, potential issues that arise regarding copyright when a language model is able to essentially reproduce some content that already exists. There might also be some, privacy issues if we're giving a lot of some personal data to some of the large tech companies who are running these large language models. Right, and then in terms of cases where we might want to think about restricting the use of large language models in the classroom, so I think the fundamental problem is that these models are already able to complete quite a lot of undergraduate assignments, at least, as they were structured until quite recently. In some cases it can do so very well, as almost give perfect answers. In other cases, they can't yet get perfect answers, but the answer that they give might be about as good as an average student is going to give you. And so then the obvious challenge that arises then is, what do one then do in terms of setting assignments and assessments that one can use for giving marks? And so, I think the short answer is that one can't, we don't really have a good way of getting around that yet. So, in the short term, I think one will have to think about relying more on sort of assessments that take place in controlled conditions, such as, tests or writing an essay in class. One can also think about other kind of workarounds, I don't know, requiring students to write the essay by hand, or, potentially there might be some kind of software that one can use and say they have to write write their assignments directly using the software, almost similar to this like kind of lockdown browser that is used for some exams. But none of these are really ideal solutions. I think for more advanced courses, I think at the moment we're still a bit more secure in terms of it is possible to set assignments that large language models can't solve directly, or where it is possible that there's still enough work to be done, even if one explicitly say that the student is allowed to use a large language model to assist. But again, as time goes on, that also might become more challenging. I mean, I think Zainab mentions about things such as data collection or running experiments, but I mean, there are already versions of these large language models that can essentially automate almost the whole data analysis pipeline, where you just upload some data and it can do all the analysis for you and write a report and everything. So even in terms of things that at the moment we think these models can't do, that it might not necessarily turn out to be the case. And then I think the sort of more pedagogical question is then, what are the foundational skills that we still want students to learn? So I mean, I think at the moment, at least my answer would be that we still want students to learn how to write, and so in computer science, how to write code from scratch, even though one can use these language models to do at least to do a lot of the basic things. So we'll have to think about how we can still ensure that. And then I think in the longer term, the challenge is also going to be that because these language models are widely available for anyone to use, in order to then eventually succeed in the workplace and to show that you have value to add, it's not going to be good enough for a student just to be able to produce some kind of average writing that the language model is able to produce. So we will have to eventually move towards these more sort of higher level skills that go beyond what language models can do directly. Yeah, so I think I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. So lots and lots of areas to kind of explore, and I feel we're just scratching the surface. There's a couple of questions in the chat, and then I also have some. So Tony Carr is asking, what if students try to use generative AI as a substitute for higher level thinking as well? I think it was responding to the conversation we had about possibly that generative AI might be able to do some of the drudge work, the kind of cognitive offloading type approaches. I don't know if anybody wants to take that on. Jan, I mean, how good is this going to get, the large language models?
Yeah, I mean, it's this technology has developed quite very rapidly, and I think it's definitely developed faster than many of the experts in the fields and people who have been working on natural language processing and related things for a long time has anticipated. So at the moment, I think there are still some more fundamental issues. The one thing is obviously that we can't rely on the factuality output, so that will still need to be checked. One still has to, at the moment, the main way to get responses from these language models is using prompts. So there's the so-called sort of prompt engineering, where one is supposed to essentially, you have to figure out exactly how to formulate the problem in order to get the response that you want from the model. So I think one can still think of that as a high level process, in terms of things that involve reasoning. One still has to be able to check or to break things down into steps. Yeah, I mean, obviously it is going to continue to get better, but I do still think there's still, definitely will still be a clear scope for some time for more sort of high level things to do that these models can't do directly.
And Zainab, you also spoke about the difference between GPT, 3.5 and 4, and that it's qualitatively better. So there's a sort of equity issue there as well. There's a question about the detectors. Are there any software programs available which can detect plagiarizing use of ChatGPT? Fayad Hendricks has said they are imperfect, heavily biased against non-native English writing, and I think that has come out. And I wonder whether any of you would like to just talk about that. I mean, certainly from my understanding, we should not be relying on the available AI text detectors for anything, for anything that is significant, and certainly wouldn't stand up in a student tribunal, for example. But perhaps you have some other views. Zainab?
I've had experiences with students using ChatGPT and submitting essays that's like you can clearly see. First of all, the first detector is you as a human being. When you're reading, you can tell the writing of a student and the writing that is coming from a ChatGPT prompt. And even worse, when the prompts are coming in, you would definitely see at the end that little conclusion that is always given by your ChatGPT in the end, what someone would just copy and paste and include that. That is one. But also, so as a human, you can start as the first person to identify that. But OpenAI themselves, they've created a tool that help educators to detect if a submitted work is came from ChatGPT. So they have that. It's called text classifier, I think. And there's ChatGPT 0, that is also one tool that you can use, and it can tell you if the work that's submitted most likely written by an LLM. But we have to be careful because these things, they sometimes are not accurate depending on which tool did you use and the prompt that the student gave, or even the prompt that you as a person who is trying to play with it to see, does it really work? So some research says it's around 25% to 50% correct in detection. And there's more tools. There's a cross-plug AI. So there are so many tools that are out there. But one thing we have to be sure to be careful of understanding this really coming from AI, or a student was just smart and they wrote. One time I was on Twitter and I saw this professor. He took his students' work and pasted it in this AI detection tools, and came out that actually the student, they copied, but they did not. So they proved that actually we did not copy, and so we will end up spending a lot of time, instead of marking and giving feedback which are constructive to our students, spending a lot of time trying to figure out which tool should we use so that we can detect the student have cheated. So I don't know, maybe we have to find a way to deal with this problem instead of just looking for these detection tools, because you spend a lot of time, okay, this is true, and then you can't copy and paste a 15-page and say, can you please check all the documents? So you will be taking some patent, which is a waste of time and resources.
Thanks. And I mean, just building on that, I suppose there's also an ethical issue here of actually pasting students' work into detectors itself, because the university, with many of the detectors, does not have a licensing agreement. So, you know, you're pasting students' work, which is, I think, a kind of privacy issue as well. So these are kinds of issues that we need to think through quite carefully, even if you know, and I know people might well be using the detectors, but that is one. And Zainab, as you said, there seems to be the issue of labor, you know, like where are we going to put precious teaching time and resources here as well. So yeah, those are also kind of important points around detection. And I'm just thinking back to what you said, Anita, about maybe the focus is on having conversations as a teaching community, you know, lecturers and students, about ethical use, both because of, you know, long-term career development, skills development, and so on. So like what we're kind of loosely calling AI literacies, and I wondered whether, I don't know, I know we have students in the room, and I wondered if any students wanted to give any views from their perspective. If anyone would like to come on camera, please do raise your hand or pop something in the chat. But you know, what can we do to kind of educate ourselves and our students in ethical uses? What are the skills that people need to know and understand about these? Yeah, anybody on the panel want to take that?
Sure. Yes, and if anyone else wants to talk, just make a note. So my PhD swung me into the field of positive psychology that I'd never heard of before, through the theory of growth mindsets. And to me, it speaks a lot to the motive behind why somebody is trying to find an alternative route. So sometimes we've overestimated, being humans and optimists. We always think that next week there will be more hours in the week than this week. Today, I definitely don't have time, but next Wednesday, you ask, I'm sure I've got an extra hour. And so we sometimes just land ourselves into a corner. But another reason why we might want to be trying to take a shortcut and cheat because the deadline is now rapidly approaching is because of believing, and it might be something not a conscious belief, but a really deep held belief that you're born a certain way and you can't do much to change that. And if it's a belief about your intelligence, being born with a certain kind of intelligence, you can do maths or you can't, you are creative, or you know you're good at this. And most people who come to university have been tagged as being, you know, superior in intellectual ability in some way, which is a bit of a lie. You know, you've certainly got a wonderful set of talents, but you've also had experiences that helped to nurture those. Anyway, so the growth mindset theory is that you are never at your optimum, that you can always develop yourself to a large extent, and that's the game. Whereas the fixed mindset is saying, you know, there's like the haves and the have-nots. You've got intellectual capacity, you know, that's why you're here. The game is to prove it or to show off, or to make sure that nobody finds out that actually you're not as brilliant as they might think you are. And it's a terrible mistake that you landed up here in the first place. So I think a lot of people have that fear. And then it's like, I can't possibly get a low mark on this assignment because what will they think? You know, my life will be over because I'll get chucked out of university. You know, I'll lose my status. And this is me. This is like, and it's too much that association with your identity being this sort of fixed mindset thing, instead of thinking, you know, you are just like an amazing growth machine. Like this is the big deal about being human, is that we adapt and we can grow and change. So that's to me trying to get to the core of what is going to make a student choose to spend their time developing good cheating methods at the AI, which in the end might actually develop some very good skills. Maybe they'll become this like super defender of the hackers. But is it because they're driven by fear? You know, so I'm more interested in getting to the sort of the root, the core down things. But yeah, that's deep territory. So we only touch there now and then.
Anybody else want to come in on talking to students? Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, what should non-technical people know about large language models? Like, what is the kind of conversations we should be having, or workshops around, like what level of depth do people need to go to in a kind of, if we are going to develop these AI literacies, and perhaps critical AI literacies more generally, and I mean sort of non-specialists, how important is it?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it will definitely be important to have some basic understanding of, you know, how these models are trained, and to have some understanding of why there are limitations in it. For example, you know, these large language models, you know, they're trained and developed in order to generate text that sounds plausible, that basically sounds like things that someone would say. And often that is a good thing. Sometimes that's what you want, but there's no, basically, at least in the standard versions, there's no real guarantee that the output that it will generate will actually be factually correct. So I think that's sort of one thing to think about. You know, the other thing is that, you know, these models are, in some sense, they're fine-tuned to basically by you know, companies such as OpenAI to generate responses that they think will be helpful to users, or that will be aligned to the goal of users. But, you know, not everyone has the same goals. Not everyone, you know, would think the same kind of things would, for example, qualify as being biased or an inappropriate answer or not. So, you know, just, you know, they are sort of inevitable that there are some ethical issues associated with just the way that these models are being used. So I think those are, yeah, some of the things that one needs to think about.
Thank you. We've got about 6 minutes to go. So I'm just going to, if anybody would like to ask a question live, you can put up your hand. I'm just looking in the chat and showing when, I don't know if there's any questions that I've missed. Michelle Wilmes has got a comment about referencing systems and citations. Referencing systems seem to be keeping a pace with providing clear, specific guidelines and attributing large language model content. So I think, Michelle, you're referring to guidelines from, say, APA and MLA and so on, about how to acknowledge if you have used ChatGPT or another model.
Correct, Sakena, and I was just adding to Cheryl's comment above. I think we're seeing that people with good intention are adapting and finding ways. I'm sure it's going to get a little bit neater as we progress, but yes, we're seeing these very conscious attempts to attribute, certainly amongst academics who we're working with.
Yeah, I suppose that is also part of the AI literacy. So the notion of authorship. And again, that's the kind of, you know, in some ways it's a simple thing if you've used ChatGPT, acknowledge it in this way. But there's a bigger question here around human AI authorship going forward. You know, who is the author? Where are the ideas coming from, and so on. So I think, Zainab, you were talking about, you know, generating a first draft, right? Or the first ideas or something like that, to help students. So again, I'd be interested maybe in the last, maybe just take a quick round around, there's some bigger questions around authorship and originality and how we might imagine that going forward in the future for your areas. You know, can we envisage a situation where, you know, the artificial intelligence tools are more than augmenting, but actually can be, you know, considered an agent in the teaching process? And we talked some bit about kind of disaggregated roles also, I suppose, in teaching and learning. Yeah, anybody want to jump in on that?
So I've just had an experience where in a journal article, I generated an example task, and we had to provide author sort of summary bios. And I wanted to acknowledge that I used ChatGPT to mostly write the bios as well as the task. And 2 reviewers said, it's a bit strange, this reference to ChatGPT that you're making. Don't quite get why you're doing that. And I thought, oh, fine. So then I've removed it. But yeah, now I'm very pleased to see a reference that will actually give us some guidelines. I think it was just too much early days. But I am so done with having to try and review an article where the ideas are so muddled because the language is holding back the ideas. And I'm like, can't you just edit this before you send it out? Just like put it through ChatGPT and let's like get this like tidy. I mean, what kind of future are we envisioning where these tools are not going to be there? They're going to get better. And I want to be an end user of a good tool. So please don't make me trawl through you know, something that's needlessly harder to do. I guess the question is, where is the originality? But I'm like, look, if it was a good idea and you got ChatGPT to write the whole thing, you still needed to put in a prompt. Okay, so it's the game might shift, and you might have someone who's all they've done is put in a prompt and tidied up, or got someone else to tidy up, and the other person did a lot of original work, and you can't tell the difference. Does it matter? I don't know. So it depends on the situation. And if you're trying to award a degree for that, I guess then it does matter. But the best advice I've ever had on this is know the students. And if a student who can't pull together an argument produces a brilliant piece of text suddenly, that's suspicious. Question them about it. So at the high end, I think we can control, because we have smaller numbers of postgraduates. If you've got a class of 1,000, it's harder to interview them, but you can get people to talk to each other and do a sort of peer assessment. Yeah. That's my bit.
Thank you. There's some great comments in the chat from Stefan and Elanka, just giving some examples. I'll let Sinette come in with her question, and then we'll have to wrap up, which is a pity because we're kind of just getting going.
Yeah, so mine's sort of half a question, half a comment on what Anita just said, and I think it's, I think in a lot of ways we need to rethink the way, and I think we have said this before in this meeting already, but we need to rethink the way we frame our assessments so that we work with what might be used, right? So if you know your students could potentially use ChatGPT to answer your question that you have assigned, why not rethink the way that you frame that prompt, right? So that they could still use it, but they use it in a constructive way that is actually allowing them to learn. So if your assignment is framed in a way that ChatGPT would be able to construct something for them and have addressed everything that they needed to, then maybe we need to rethink the way we frame that. I think, Anita, you worked a little bit with having students critique what ChatGPT has done wrong in attempting to do these things, and maybe that working backwards from saying, okay, this is ChatGPT's first attempt. Why don't you compare this first attempt to a final attempt and see what's changed? Obviously, depends on the discipline you're working in, but certainly in an academic writing space, that would be a very productive thing to focus on, doing those comparisons and seeing how something evolves from a draft to a final product. Yeah, so well, I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were on that.
Okay, thank you. We are on 4 o'clock, so if anybody needs to leave, that's fine. Thank you very much. I will let Zainab, who had a hand up, have the last word, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I wanted to add on what Sanet commented on, and in some of the research and people that are currently working in understanding ChatGPT and using Classroom, one thing that the suggestion is given, this is for classrooms where you have to give assignment, not necessarily the postgraduate level, is to take the question that you have, run it to ChatGPT and determine how easy to use it is, how easy to produce an answer. Like Anita said, some of the questions in her math class, ChatGPT is not able to solve, or some LLM are not able to solve. So by determining that, then you will know that this actually would need someone to sit down and think, because we know that what these with this model do, they actually mimic human intelligence, but they're not in the level as where we are. I think understanding of where that we are more intelligent than these tools are, it's very important to the student that we have, I could say. But going back to the educators, and what we can do is to run your question there and determine how easy it is to be answered, and by looking at that, maybe you can improve it to see we can add an engagement to the students so they can engage in it, or you can make the question a little bit more complex. Because and another thing that I've also noted, if you give this LLM a more complex question, they tend to fumble around and not be able to bring in the solution that you'd be expecting to come out. So by increasing complexity, it can also increase produce a better quality question or assignment. Yeah.
All right. I'm very sorry to say we will have to end. The conversation's getting very rich. For me, I'm taking away some very big topics here around ethics, equity, and also the labor that is increasingly going to be required to monitor and research and adjust both assessments and teaching and learning. So this does feel like a big things coming up for us as a community. So I just want to say thank you to the panelists and to everyone who came. We are having monthly panels, so we will invite you all again. Please, there's some interesting chats, people reaching out to each other. So please keep the community going. I think this is something that students, teachers, lecturers, tutors, we all need to work on together as we shape these conversations and shape what look like new practices coming. And yes, the student guide, the guides that we have created, which I'm just going to share my screen again very briefly, are for general use. And given that the situation developments are changing, we will be updating them. So we welcome all feedback. We're also collecting case studies of use, and we will be distributing a form, and that's also a link is available from that web page there. And thanks, Noel, for putting it into the link. So thank you very much. We've had over, we had about 130 people today, which I think is one of our highest brown bags ever. So obviously that was the excellence of the panel. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great afternoon. Bye, everyone.